Everybody wants to change the world, but that's a big ask. We're all damaged, we're all flawed, but there are degrees of damage and degrees of flawed. The feeling that cannot find its expression in tears will cause other organs to weep. Therapy is the fastest way to work out, what are you thinking? Why are you thinking that? Where did you learn to think that? And then to set about changing it. That's the power of your mind, and if you have the power to create it, you have the power to uncreate it.
Why therapy? When did you get into therapy?
You know, my father was an amazing man. He was you call it a principal, we call it a head teacher. And he was always interested in the personal development of children. And I always saw that he always believed he could make a difference in any child's life. And initially I thought I might follow him, and he wanted me to be a teacher and do what he did, but I was much more interested in being a therapist. And so I thought I'd train to be a child psychologist, but I realized very quickly that wasn't for me. So I came to LA and worked for Jane Fonda instead, very different, to aerobics. Okay. But I always had that interest. I've always been interested in human behavior. And being a therapist, if you're a good therapist, is the fastest way to change a lot of people one at a time. I mean, everybody wants to change the world, but that's a big ask. But if you can change people one soul at a time, that's how you can help change the world.
So you think of therapy as human behavior? You think of it as a means to change human behavior?
I think therapy is very good at finding broken people and putting them back together. And we're all broken to a degree. But I think a good therapist and a good therapy can undo damage. I mean, we're all damaged, we're all flawed, but there are degrees of damage and degrees of flawed. And I love that thing about in Japan where they believe that a broken vase that has a gold filigree in it is better. So I believe that everyone is flawed, and the best we can be. I'm a flawed person, and I had flawed relationships with flawed people. I call it being flawsome. One of the rules of the mind is the longer a belief is held, the more resistance there can be to letting it go. So certainly if you had a belief for 5 years, it's easier to let it go than one you've had for 40 years. Many people don't even know they have these beliefs. And when they have their aha moment, wow, that was because of that. Therapy is the fastest way to work out, what are you thinking? Why are you thinking that? Where did you learn to think that? And then to set about changing it. You see, people say, isn't it hard to change? No, you get to change twice every day. You get to change something you think, and then you get to change something you do. So every day you can change at least twice. And people say, can you change in 21 days? You can change in 21 seconds. And a good therapist starts off being a good detective. A good detective will kind of look at stuff and stick pictures up on a wall and try and work out what happened. And a good therapist does the same. You listen to your clients. You pick up what I call ear prick up moments. So you start off being a detective. Gathering information, looking for clues, and then you become almost like a dentist, extracting all that toxic stuff. And then you become like a coder, coding in and wiring in something much better for your client. And if you do all those three at the same time, it's immensely effective. I have an amazing therapist called Didi, and he was in one of my trainings. And I noticed that he was always going to the bathroom and his eyes were running a lot. He was always blowing his nose. And he said, yeah, I've got all these issues, conjunctivitis, nasal drip, irritable bladder. And when he came up to do a session and we were talking, I really felt like it, one of my favorite expressions is this: the feeling that cannot find its expression in tears will cause other organs to weep. And I thought, and that's from a very famous psychiatrist called Henry Moore. I thought, I wonder, it feels like his body is crying. So I asked him some questions, and in the most matter-of-fact way, he said, well, when I was 10, my parents put me on the street. I didn't go out with my mother, you see, normalizing it already. I said, when did you go back? He went, no, I never went back. They put me on the street. I thought they put him on the street for an hour. He said, no, they kicked me out. And then he said, they're Chinese. I'm like, Chinese people don't put their children on the street. There's no ethnicity that puts their children on the street at 10. And then I happened to say, no, I wouldn't put my dog on the street. And he went, I've got a dog. I would never do that. And it was the first time he got to realize that it's not normal. And it's so sad how clients normalize what people do to them.
Have you ever been stuck? Like that patient or that client of yours put you in a position where you're like stuck? You're like, even with all your experience, you're like, wow.
I think with a great therapist, the thing is, it's not what you do, it's what you help your clients. So I do something. So RTT is a formula. So the first thing you do.
What is RTT?
Rapid Transformational Therapy.
Okay.
So the first thing you do is you have an intake form and you look at that, and even then you're gathering information, and then you invite the client to take you back. Let's go back and have a look at where this began, and back they go. And then when you've got them, I do something called left hand, right hand, and it's okay, let's imagine you're looking at these scenes in this hand, and let's look at today. And I want you to tell me, how did those scenes cause today? Because if I tell them, hey, look, you do this because of that, they could say, well, that's not true. I told my friends, I went, oh, that's rubbish. But when you let the client work it out, because they're very able to do that, oh, I see. My dad left when I was 2. My new dad had a new baby and they didn't love me. And then my dad left as well. And now I can see that I can't form a relationship because I have this belief that people don't stick around and I'm not good enough. And now I can see that this is because of this. When they work it out, it's their power. It's not my power, it's their power. And one of the things I say to clients a lot is, isn't that interesting? One of my clients, for instance, was telling me that she was molested. And when she got molested by her grandfather, she gained a lot of weight to deter him, not consciously. Then she got this shedding skin around her thighs. And he found that so revolting that he stopped touching her because her skin would flake off. And I said, isn't that amazing how powerful you are? You created that. That's the power of your mind. And if you have the power to create it, you have the power to uncreate it.
Why train other therapists? Why not be a legend in what you do? Why would you pass it on?
Well, my great friend Wayne Dyer said something. He said, do not die with your music still inside you. And so if you imagine if Frank Sinatra was a plumber and Barbra Streisand was a nail technician, they wouldn't have passed on their gift. And I am a good therapist, and I love being a good. People ring me and go, hey, I'm in Alabama, can I see you? I'm in Australia, there's only one of me. And so I wanted to share that. I got a letter today from someone saying...
So that's your legacy?
Yeah, it's a legacy. Someone today wrote to me and said, thank God you did this, or I'd still be in the same mess I was in. I'd love to have RTT in more schools, more hospitals, more prisons.
More regions?
More regions. I'd love to have RTT therapists. I'd love one day when a doctor would say, before I give you this antidepressant, let's have a little look at RTT.
If you've been practicing for 30 years, do you see people getting worse or getting better?
I think what we're doing to every generation coming up is making them worse.
How come?
Well, when I was 17 and my boyfriend dumped me, I was heartbroken. I couldn't follow him on Instagram. I couldn't hack into his Facebook and see what he was doing. I just had to get over it. I couldn't call him. He didn't have a phone, actually. Only his parents had a phone. So I just had to get over it, and I did. But I think nowadays, the fact that we can look at what people are doing, we have this overexposure every day to false images of perfection. Everyone who's had a baby is in a bikini looking amazing. Everyone's got nicer kids, nicer homes, nicer dinners, better hair than you. And I think this whole thing about the thigh gap and the bikini bridge and the A3 challenge, what we're doing, especially to girls, you've got to be thin. You've got to have fat hair and thin thighs. But if you've got thin hair and fat thighs, what does that say? It says you don't matter, and that's not true. But I think the media is making a whole generation ill, especially girls. But the epidemic of men with eating disorders now tells you that. But also, we have something else where a whole generation don't speak on the phone. They text and they WhatsApp. They don't pick up the phone and say hello. They speak in text. They don't have grammar anymore. They can't have a meal without having their iPhone or their phone on the table. And we're making people really disconnected. And when you arrive on the planet, you have 2 things you need: find connection and avoid rejection. And if you're finding connection through your phone, then actually you're becoming disconnected. I see that people go out to dinner, everyone's got their phone. A plane lands, everyone gets out their phone. The movie ends, everyone gets out their phone. We're connecting so much with a screen. That means we're disconnecting from people. I can walk down the street, go to my bank, there's nobody in there. I go to a store, there's nobody there. Very soon we'll get an Uber with no driver. We're actually making people and connection so redundant. You go through your whole day now and not get everything, not speak to anyone, get everything delivered. I spent quite a lot of time with tribes, and when you're around tribes, you understand something. We are not designed for the modern life we've created, where you can just go on Instacart and groceries are there. You can spend months and not speak to anyone. And now, of course, you have this new thing where you can go online and talk to a doctor, but you're not talking to them. They're not listening to you. They're not hearing the break in your voice when you describe. They're not thinking, oh, every time I mention your mother, your chin starts to wobble or tears come out of your eyes. And a good therapist is looking for clues. I notice your voice breaks every time you mention your brother or your father. But when you're doing all of that online and not face to face, you're losing connection, and connection is in our DNA. We need it.
In your practice, what's a loss to you?
What would be a loss? I mean, obviously, as a therapist,
You've never had a loss?
Well, yeah, I've had a couple of clients go to hospice, and I've worked with a lot of people with cancer. I've had it myself, and with cancer, there's always three things that can happen. Some cancers are completely survivable. Stage 1 womb cancer, which I had, that's nothing. They take your womb out and you don't have cancer, and it's stage 1, so it's totally survivable. And then you get a cancer where you can contain it for a long time. You might not get better, but you may have 10 years. Someone said to one of my patients, you will die with cancer, but not of it, because you can just hold it. And then there are cancers where, sadly, you're not going to survive. And that is sad. But even then, you can still help a client.
Do you ever get tired of therapy? Do you ever feel like...
No, never.
No? Still today?
No, I've never got tired of it, because people say that, isn't it draining, people telling you their stuff? No, it's amazing, because I know the day I see them is the day that they can change. And there are not many careers that meet all your needs, but when you're a therapist, a good therapist, with clients you're getting results with, you feel connected, you certainly feel significant. Every day for probably 30 years, I've woken up to emails, texts, letters, maybe a card saying, wow, look what's happened since I saw you, or I lost 40 pounds. I've got engaged. I finally got pregnant. My kid and I getting on so much better.
Upside. What about, you don't have weeks of just darkness when people just come in dark?
I never have weeks. I never have weeks of darkness or even
whining?
days.
What people that come in just whine too?
Sometimes people come in and they tell me stories that are so sad. And I've certainly had a tear in my eye many a time with clients. I don't cry, but I'll really feel that emotion.
It doesn't change the day for you? That day that someone tells you a really sad story?
No, because I know that even with the saddest story ever, and believe me, I've heard some terrible stories, even with the saddest story you could ever imagine. I'll give you an example. I worked with this amazing girl who was telling me this story that her father was a drug dealer, and he dropped her and her sister off and said, go over there, there's people who are going to babysit for you. And her sister walked into the swimming pool and drowned, and she was blamed for that. And she said, my father always said my whole life I wasn't his, and he treated me horribly because he believed I wasn't his. The mother left long ago, and he had about 6 children, but she was the one that wasn't his. And I said, well, where are these others, apart from one judge, because they're all in jail. And I said, thank God you're not his. That's the best thing that could ever happen to you. You're not his. She said, that's true, because I would get up and go to school really early and stay. I hated the holidays, because school was my salvation. I got away from him and that crazy house, and I studied a lot, very academic. And just that little reframe, the worst thing is the best thing. When you're a kid, not being his made you different and disconnected, but now you can look back and think, I'm so glad I'm not his. And so if you can reframe anything with a client, no matter how bad it was, even if they say, I was molested as a child, which is awful, but today you're not going to be molested because you're grown up. You have a voice.
I'm honored to have you on the show.
Oh, well, I'm honored to be here.
I want to do so much with you moving forward. I want to bring you to the Middle East and North Africa.
I'd love that.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome. Thank you too. Check out my next video here.